It seems at any moment of the day you can find a crime show showing how scientists can be the key to solving crimes. Well, that's true, but in real life, there's so much more to it. Hello, I'm Charna Davis-Wiese, and welcome to UCF Profiles. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Schultz from the UCF Department of Anthropology. And Dr. Schultz is an forensic anthropologist,
yes,
which means you are an expert in the study of skeletons.
Yes, I study the human skeleton.
Okay, you probably heard this every time anybody hears what you do. When you were 10 and they said, what do you want to grow up to be, did you say, I want to grow up and study skeletons? Where did this come from?
You know, when I was younger, I always thought it would be interesting to be a scientist. I did not know if it would ever turn out that way. I mean, I was like many students. I kept switching in my major as an undergraduate. Business, I was even thinking geology at one point, and then I saw the, remember the Iceman that was found in the Alps?
Right.
So I saw the Iceman, and I thought, you know, it would be really interesting to study, you know, older skeleton. That was a mummy.
So you were already in college?
I was already an undergraduate, essentially a senior at SUNY Stony Brook, and I went over to the anthropology department, and I said, you know, I would like to study something like this. And I was trying to study bones for the geology department, but it just did not work out. So then I went to anthropology, and I took my first introduction to physical anthropology class, and I was immediately hooked.
As a senior, so did you have to start all over again then?
It took a little longer to finish up, definitely, but I would not be here today, you know, if I had not gone over there. And I always think about just, you know, it was luck. I was lucky SUNY Stony Brook had a large anthropology department. So there were many biological anthropology courses I was able to take. And immediately I thought I'd be studying fossils, to be honest. But as I progressed and took more and more courses, eventually my main focus became the human skeleton and studying it from modern context.
You know, everybody this is profiles, and one of the things we do is profile professors, how they got to where they are, and it seems that almost everybody has a moment that they can recognize as the moment where they found their passion or had a clue to it.
Yeah.
I guess the key is being in tune to that.
Well, yeah, being in tune. And for me, once I started taking the physical anthropology courses, I finally loved school for the first time.
Really?
And I knew that I'm here. I'm here to stay. I always knew I wanted to go to graduate school, but I was lucky. I actually found anthropology early enough as an undergraduate where I could then prepare myself to move on to the next level.
And you know, people probably don't realize that. You have to have a lot of education past undergraduate level.
Well, I think part of the issue is it can be tough for some students with 4 years trying to take enough courses in different areas to find a discipline that they really enjoy. Because, I mean, many students will go back for more than one master's degree now, or they may have to go back and take some additional undergraduate courses to prepare themselves. So, you know, it's for me, it was being in the right place at the right time, being in a program, a school where they had a large anthropology program, so I could then pursue those types of courses.
So to you, it was actually the study of the science and the workings of the human body rather than the creepy part that people might go, oh.
Yeah, I mean, I study just skeletons, clean skeletons. So yeah, it's much different than what a pathologist would study.
You know, you see all these crime shows, and I bring it up, and I'm sure everybody says it to you because that's what so many people talk about.
Sure.
But that's not real life. There's not only 4 or 5 people suddenly within an hour clean and tidy, they've solved a crime.
No, it's tough for me to watch some of the CSI shows because I work with law enforcement on a regular basis. I work with crime scene investigators and the medical examiner, and I know how it takes much longer to solve many of these homicides. You know, but for me, I don't watch the television shows, but I do actually have an assignment for one of my courses where I require students to watch a CSI television show and critique it from what they've learned either through the course or through their discipline. So they serve as good teaching tools.
So tell me about what you did with the or what you do with the Sheriff's Department.
Well, the Sheriff's Department, through my department, myself and another professor, we have a formalized relationship. And one of my areas is I work with geophysical tools, one of which is ground penetrating radar. And so I'm available for the Sheriff's Department if they need body searches, So if they get a tip that a body may be buried somewhere, I may come in with the equipment, and this is just a non-invasive type tool that we would use over the potential crime scene to see if we can locate possible burial or a buried weapon.
So it's a type of radar. One thing I did read in researching forensic anthropology and the different kind of crime scene professionals is that a lot of times a law enforcement agency has to hire a professional from outside of law enforcement because they really can't afford to keep a forensic anthropologist on staff and really can't afford the equipment.
Yeah, and so that's one of the issues. They did contribute some money towards the equipment, so I'm available for them. And I'll also provide training when needed. And right now, with the Orange County Sheriff's Office, we're actually working on another project using metal detectors and magnetic locators where we've buried decommissioned weapons. And we're learning how, with the GPR as well, we're learning how we can use these different geophysical tools to locate weapons. So if they get a tip, all right, we think we know this weapon may be buried, we would have already conducted the research, we know what tool we would need to use, whether or not it would detect the weapon in these different circumstances. And so for them, it's a great collaborative project with myself and the personnel from the CSI department.
So what does it look like, the ground penetrating radar? Does it look like a metal detector? Is it big? Is it heavy?
The big joke, it's all integrated into a push cart. So the big joke looks like a shopping cart or a baby carriage. And there's essentially just a big antenna and a computer. And the antenna just emits an electromagnetic wave into the ground. And when it picks up on something different, all I would see on the monitor would be just a generalized anomaly. And then that would require, depending on the number of anomalies at a site, that would then require us to do some type of invasive testing.
Have you been with them when you found things?
When I first arrived at UCF, fall 2003, I was involved with a case with them where I had to borrow the GPR from that time through somebody from my dissertation committee up at the University of Florida, and I was able to borrow it, and there was a tip that their body was buried under a cement slab in a garage. And I was able to use the equipment to confirm that there was something buried under the garage. And that's what led to, when we were all able to see the usefulness of the equipment, that's kind of what led to the formalized relationship.
So there was a body there?
Yeah, and the case is actually finally going to court now, next week, I think, or on the 1st. So it's not something I can really talk about because it hasn't cleared yet. It's been continued
But the
for quite a
equipment
while.
worked?
Yes, yeah, we're very successful. Florida is a great place because equipment works great in sand, and that's what we have mainly in Florida. So I'm fortunate, that I can use the equipment here, and that I can work with a sheriff on a regular basis. And many times it could be something as simple as we have potential search. So I don't necessarily need the equipment. We could use other type of search methods to go out and work with them.
I bet you might find a lot of other things while you're looking for the weapons as well.
Oh, yes, we have. And using the metal detectors, you'll find all kinds of metal debris, junk debris that's buried.
What was the most unusual or the coolest thing that you found?
We did one weapon search where it looked like a garbage dump was buried in somebody's backyard. And so it gets
they just buried
tedious.
so much that rather than throw it out, they just buried it.
The metal, yeah, there were lots. We were detecting everything in the backyard, and so.
We talked about the students and the kind of classes. Somebody's interested in taking some of your classes. What kind of things do you teach?
Well, unfortunately, I have 2 of my courses are required for an undergraduate certificate. It's a death investigation certificate called Crime Scene Investigation. So I'm lucky. I get lots of students from criminal justice, psychology, anthropology, students interested in pursuing jobs, law enforcement, and death investigation. And so my 2 courses are my basic forensic anthropology course and an archaeological sciences course I teach is essentially a forensic archaeology course. And so with forensic anthropology, we deal with the skeleton as the basis of the course and how we essentially talk about forensic anthropology within death investigation. And we'll talk about other areas outside of forensic anthropology, talk a little bit about entomology, the laws as it pertains to forensic anthropologists. Many times I can show films and current events, and I'll even bring in somebody from the medical examiner's office to talk about what goes on there that I work with, somebody from the sheriff's department. So they're very interdisciplinary courses with forensic anthropology, but really the whole focus of both courses would be the death investigation part.
So they also call you also work with the medical examiner's office?
Yes, I'm actually on contract for our District 9 medical examiner, which is Orange and Osceola counties. So whenever there's a skeletal ID or even a search involved, they would actually call me directly, and then I would go and either assist with the recovery and excavation, and then when it's at the office, then I would go and analyze the skeleton, work with the medical examiners there.
I know we probably don't have enough hours to actually go into everything you can do to analyze the skeleton, but to those of us who are not in the medical field and not anthropologists, you think, okay, so the bones are broken, there is something here, something there, but you can find out a lot more.
Well, yeah, and the simplest thing is, first things we need to do is identify the skeleton. So simplest is just to create a biological profile: sex, ancestry, age, stature. Then I would look for any old injuries that might be helpful to identify somebody, like a broken bone or some type of pathology. We would look for any type of trauma that may have occurred at or around death that may be helpful in trying to determine how the person died. And could even talk about things that happened to the skeleton after it was deposited, like carnivore damage or anything else that might obscure the perimortem trauma.
Does it take a long time to do some kind of identification like that? Like, for example, it always amazes me when I'll read in the newspaper about a particular investigation. It'll say, oh, it was a Caucasian 32-year-old woman. Obviously, the height, that I can understand,
yes.
But is that difficult to tell?
Depends on the skeleton. Ancestry sometimes can be easier with some skeletons. Many times, it could be difficult with mixed ancestry. Age, you generally just provide a range, 10 or 15-year age range, maybe. So sometimes it's easier to know. The first thing is, it depends on how much of the skeleton's actually there.
Right.
If you have a complete skeleton, if there's a complete skeleton available for me to analyze, it makes my job easier. And many times, in order to identify somebody, you need to have a list of possibles. So it just all depends on what's available, what is found during the investigation that will then help with trying to identify somebody. And usually the final identification may be either an odontologist or the forensic dentist would come in and look at the teeth, or they may opt, if the odontologist can't do identification, or if there isn't older dental records, then they'll just do a DNA analysis if they really need to have a positive ID.
This is so interesting. We'll talk more with Dr. John Schultz in a moment. Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. John Schultz. He is a forensic anthropologist from UCF, which means he studies skeletons. Now, you did something very cool that I'm sure those of us who are in the TV biz know that there's so much more work and so much behind the scenes doing television than actually meets the eye. But the Discovery Channel contacted you to help them with a series on mummies. How did that happen?
Well, Atlantic Productions, a British production company, they, I think, pitched the idea to Discovery Channel, and Discovery Channel said, okay, we'll make this television show. So they sent a representative to the States, and this person just went around and just started contacting various professors, contacted a professor I knew at University of Florida, and he recommended that they talk to me, and I essentially just, they came down one day, I met them on Saturday, and we just chatted. And they wound up picking me up.
And actually, as they're listening, they're is he good to us? He's good TV.
I honestly think part of it was a joke I made. Because they were asking me all these questions. First we had lunch, and then we went to UCF, and they were just filming me, so they would have some film to bring back. And they were asking me a bunch of questions, and they said, if you were, if you had your choice of any place to go in the world, where would you want to go? And I happened to be drinking coffee. And I held my coffee up and I said, as long as there's coffee, I'm willing to go anywhere. And they loved it. And when I did the show, they always asked me about coffee. That was always the joke. I could be anywhere in the world and I could get a cup of coffee. if they, every now and then they'd be like, John, your energy levels are low. Do you need some coffee? And so it worked out.
You know, you hear that a lot in television. Bring the energy up, bring the energy up. So you traveled in many places all around the world.
Most of the shows I filmed were in Peru. There was a show in Wyoming in the U.S., one in Ireland, and one in England.
And Ireland, you said, was just absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, it was just such a beautiful, beautiful country. I mean, I can't wait to go back again.
So what were you doing? The title says mummies, but it wasn't only mummies.
No, the title said it was Mummy Autopsy. I did 9 shows. I think there wound up being 12 or 13 episodes, and I think my shows wound up being stretched out, I think, over 8 episodes. And it was either a mummy or a skeleton. The associate producers from the show, I think, essentially just went around contacting as many people as they could, trying to find interesting stories. And it just wound up that many of them were either mummies, but there are quite a few skeletons. And for me, my specialty is skeletons, are not mummies. So I was actually much more comfortable when I was able to study or analyze a skeleton.
They will use state-of-the-art chemical analysis, carbon dating, and radiography. The mummy investigators are John Schultz, a forensic anthropologist who investigates suspicious deaths.
What were you able to tell them?
Well, many times it was essentially what I would do with a forensic case, actually. I would try to do a biological profile. You're trying to provide a face to the skeleton.
Give a person to it.
Exactly.
A human.
Yeah. And so just the same thing I said, provide something with a biological profile. Try to determine something about their life history. Broken bones, arthritis, diseases. And trying to, if you see a particular injury, trying to figure out why this person would have had this injury in relationship to the context they provided with the show.
What was the oldest one?
Oh, I think was maybe, we studied a mummy in Peru. I'll be honest, I don't remember. I mean, it was thousands of years old. I don't remember all the specifics since it was quite a while ago.
Is there a difference between some of these older skeletons, these older remains, compared to more contemporary ones? Could you tell differences in the way, have humans changed in any way?
Maybe some of the diseases you might see are a little different, or even how physically active an individual may have been in terms of that. Definitely you can see. I mean, not all the skeletons we see now. I mean, many people, if somebody's a laborer, you can tell they have larger muscle insertions, may have increased levels of arthritis, but you don't see that with every modern skeleton. I mean, you'd see much of that with older skeletons, and also different types of diseases or stress that the person may have been susceptible to that we really would not see as much now because of just better diets.
You told me that one of the interesting places you went to was a cemetery, and my mother-in-law visits them too, and I always thought, and she actually found, when she was visiting Germany, a cemetery that had all the names, many of the names of the people in the town where they live now, because they immigrated from, I guess at those times they would promise them farmland, and they'd immigrate from Germany to particular areas in the Midwest, and she just thought it was the most interesting thing, and took all these pictures in the cemetery, and my kids were like, that is so gross. But it's a real sense of history. Oh,
history and even art. I mean, I love the old New England cemeteries where they have all the old headstones, and it's folk art. And that's one thing that intrigues me. Since I study skeletons, I love to see all the death images, and there are lots of skeletons on the various stones. And for me, going to Ireland and seeing one of those very old cemeteries there really was an incredible experience, seeing all the old Celtic crosses and just different types of stones we would not see here in the States.
But unfortunately, you couldn't get images of it.
No, when it was when I had my break from the filming, and this is the one moment I always remember. When it was my turn to just kind of sit back and take a break, I started to go around taking photos, and then my battery died in my camera. So I only have a few photos from the cemetery, and that's someday I would love to go back so I can take some more.
And it's very interesting. We actually did visit one. We were visiting with a friend in Baltimore. I went to a very famous Buffalo, New York, and we went to a very famous old cemetery there that was very large.
Yeah.
And to see some of these gravestones that were from hundreds of years ago, and to see what they wrote, how long they lived, it was actually very interesting.
It's incredible when you look at the architecture and the amount of money people spent on some of the mausoleums they put up and some of the columns. It's quite fascinating, just the figures that are placed on these graves from that sort of Victorian time period is when it's excessive was what many people were going for.
Probably not going to go there on your honeymoon, though, huh?
No.
Back to forensic anthropology. You know, I hate to keep bringing back the TV shows,
that's fine.
but I do know when college students take a look at it, or people going for a second career and they think, well, maybe I'd like to do that and start looking at this course or their certificate, they have to really consider what positions there are available afterwards. I mean, I think there are probably more CSI versions than there are forensic anthropologists.
Well, obviously forensics is such a hot topic right now. Television, academics, many shows, and their students, I mean, they see the exposure, they think it's interesting, and many of them want to do forensics. I mean, I talk to students all the time asking me what type of jobs are available, what type of career options. And many of them will maybe go on to CSI work. Many of them will just wind up going into law enforcement, but they can work for a medical examiner as a death investigator or autopsy tech. So there are jobs out there, but there are many people looking for those jobs now.
Right, and they have to consider that, and they have to consider which way to go and how many years they're going to spend studying.
Absolutely. For somebody that wants to do forensic anthropology work, there are opportunities, but for most of us, we are full-time professors, and we just consult generally with a local medical examiner or law enforcement, but you really have to go on for a PhD. There are some positions where you can do it with a master's degree, but generally you're not usually a full-time forensic anthropologist. You may have some other duties at the office as well.
What was your thesis on?
Oh, my thesis was, for my dissertation, actually involved ground penetrating radar. And when I was up at the University of Florida, I went to graduate school, one of the big forensic anthropology labs in the country. And we had hooked up with a soil scientist, and we started using the ground penetrating radar to search for bodies, but we did not know what we were looking for. So my dissertation research evolved out of this topic. I essentially constructed my own graves using pig cadavers, and I used a GPR for almost 2 years monitoring these graves so we could try to understand what we were looking for.
And then later, probably built on it and actually used it in your career.
Well, yeah, and that's where, like I said, when I came here, and now, I mean, I've worked with various law enforcement agencies using the ground penetrating radar to help them with searches. And this has kind of led to me expanding to the other geophysical technologies with the Sheriff's Department, at the Orange County Sheriff's Department, working with them with weapons now.
Tell me, are you doing a research project right now?
Well, it's the one with the Sheriff's Department.
Is that
what we're
one?
doing now, yes, where we have multiple decommissioned weapons buried, and we're using these different technologies, trying to understand how we can locate them.
I bet you that is kind of like a lot of jobs that look so glamorous and so interesting, and people will explain it as being hours of tedium highlighted by a point of incredible excitement. I imagine when you come across something, it must be kind of like, not that it's a present because it's a skeleton or a weapon, but it was almost not knowing a surprise and opening up this thing that you don't know, that you've been looking for, you don't know what it is.
Oh, definitely. And I learned early on, we were always optimistic we would find something when we were going out on searches. But I learned often, most of the time, that there may be a tip that law enforcement needs to investigate, and most often it's not going to lead to anything. However, you investigate the tip, you can then rule that area out and move on to your next tip. So yeah, most often you're not going to find anything on most of the searches that we're involved with.
And it's certainly not done in an hour with four commercial breaks.
No. It takes, it's very tedious, and it's important. Like if there's a skeleton in the woods and we need to collect it, it's important we take our time, not only preserve the skeleton, but we need to collect as much of it as possible and make sure that people aren't stepping on bones, make sure that they're not leaving parts of the skeleton out there. We need as much of it as possible as we can collect and any other evidence that must be at the scene. And we don't go to the scene like they do in the CSI television shows, and automatically start taking pictures of things and then immediately picking them up. I mean, there's a whole process involved with roping the scene off, with documenting everything, not only with pictures, but measuring and adding scales and other indicators into the field of view so you can, create that scene again.
Absolutely amazing. So interesting. Our half hour flew by.
Wow.
I know. Dr. John Schultz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Who knows, you might have more college students looking for more jobs after they watch this and hear how interesting you're doing it.
Great.
Thanks again. I'm Charlotte Davis-Reese. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again.